The series came about one day as I completed a large series of works, mostly in color, and I had been working on color for years now. And I just started to ask myself, where am I with my own personal life, and where am I in relationship to the work that I've been creating? And I started to notice that all of this layering of color that I was doing, including the texturizing of the actual painting, the texturing of the painting, was adding a sort of like a blanket over a lot of the things that I had learned and things that I really liked and enjoyed about painting. And part of that blanket was sort of camouflaging the line quality or the tonal quality, the realism that I had been accustomed to working with. And having gone into abstract expressionist as a painter, I wanted to bring that all back again. Simultaneously in my life at the same time, I was going through a series of events where I was sort of like removing ideas, removing, cleaning perceptions, rethinking, relooking at a lot of ideas that we have, preconceived notions as a society, as a mass consciousness, as my own personal endeavors and experience as a painter, as a man, as a person. Where do I stand with all of that? What if I were to extrapolate all the color or most of the color from my paintings? What would that look like? And what is it that I want to say with this series? And what is it that I'd like to let people know about how I view the world? And so began the process of looking at my florals and saying, well, I enjoy line, I enjoy the tonal aspect of something, I enjoy the three-dimensional aspect of the representation of the form. And for me, this is a sense of classicism that began, from the early moments of when I started to study art. From nothing comes something. And so I started to realize that that is an intrinsic part of my human being aspect. And so I wanted to explore that. And so this series developed around that. Minimal amount of color, some tonal range in paint, large canvases, because the exploration of this thing needed for me to be big and large. And I want the influence of the size of the canvas to be prominent to the viewer. So they need to be engulfed. I want them to be completely engulfed into the visuals. As an artist is when we put a line down onto a canvas, it now has created a sense of space or relationship to the extremities of the canvas. So we can say put a curved line this way. It now has a relationship with something that was blank before. It now has a relationship to this area and to this form and to this base and to this top. It's suddenly now suspended in midair, and it's become from nothing, it's become something. And so that sense of creation almost gives a sense of purpose. It's almost like primordial directive that we have of having to be able to communicate with each other. And so line ends up being one of the most important aspects of the actual creation of a painting. And you'll see that often, whether you're painting in abstract or you're painting in realism, the line becomes a very strong emphasis in terms of what actually helps support the entirety of the structure. So line is something that's quite prominent in this series also, and it's emphasized in many various ways, from something very thin to very, very bold strokes that are put in the largest size canvases. It tells a message. It's a pictorial organization that has served humanity for eons. And we use it mostly to direct information one to the other. I mean, if you look at words, when you do actually write the word, I mean, it's a series of broken lines. I mean, the word itself, if you were to take the W-O-R-D and write it as a script, it's one continual line. And if you were to take that word and blow it up, it's a beautiful representation of a work of art. There's a heavy influence of Baroque art, or Baroque influence in my work, actually. And a lot of people ask me where that came from, mostly having grown up in North America. Well, as a young child, my Sicilian background is obviously a very heavy influence. The small town from which I'm from in Sicily, which is called Modica, is primarily was reconstructed in the 17th century after a major earthquake, and was completely reconstructed with the Baroque influence of the time. So in my travels going back and forth, as I'm learning about my own heritage and learning the language, and hanging out with my grandparents and my aunts and my cousins there, every building that I would look at and that I would, put my eyes towards, the architecture had these beautiful floral designs or cupids or angels protruding out of the building. And I was always fascinated by it. Like, I had collected so many photographs of just structures of buildings, architectural details, paintings, the smallest little detail that I can find. I was fascinated by it, and I realized later, years later, when I did begin to paint, that was imprinted in my mind very heavily. The influence of that sort of architecture, which was so vastly different than what I was beginning to get used to in Canada, where the structures were very geometrical, and here we have this big floral influence, cascading off the walls. I realized later, while I'm painting, that I began to paint them very, very large, and that was the type of, almost the influence that I actually had imprinted within my mind, as I saw these flowers being, mega size and proportion, and I began to paint them to reflect what was actually in my mind, almost like a child trying to describe something and saying, oh my God, these things have such a heavy influence on me, and this is how I see them, and this is how I need to paint them. And so part of that influence in regards to the size of the paintings came from that initial imprint that I had as a child.